Okay, Upper Four, welcome to the lesson for Friday, the 24th of April, which we begin by looking at the answers to the Britain Alone video, which you should already have firstly got the answers and then secondly marked yours or someone else's. However, if you didn't, these are the responses, and I would like you now to mark them in your exercise books. It's likely that you've not got exactly what I've got, but something close will be fine. Okay, question 1 for Britain Alone was, what pieces of advice did the government give to people at the start of the war? Various pieces of advice were in the video, including keep off the streets, don't expose yourself to unnecessary danger. This all sounds really familiar. I don't know why. And then one which I suspect probably isn't yet relevant, carry your gas mask at all times. Question 2, what actions did the government take at the start of the war to limit casualties? Quite a lot of them were mentioned. Here are some. Closing of theatres and cinemas, evacuating children, clearing hospitals, and the preparation of 1 million coffins. Question 3, September 39 to April 40 is often called the phony war. Why might this be? Well, it's because basically nothing happened. There's no air raids, war seemed very distant, and all the measures that were put in place stopped. Question 4, the German strategy was known as Blitzkrieg, lightning war. Why was that? Well, it means lightning war because it's to do with the speed of the German attacks. It's meant to take months, if not years, if it can be done at all, to defeat France. But in the end, it's done in a matter of 8 weeks. Question 5, how can we tell that the German army was very confident of beating Britain with Operation Sea Lion? Well, they filmed a mock victory newsreel. Section 2, why was control of the skies above Britain crucial to the German invasion? So, to invade Britain, you've got to get across the Channel, and you can't get across the Channel if you're Germany because the British Navy is in the way. But you can destroy the British Navy if you can use your aeroplanes on them. But you can only use your aeroplanes on them if you've got control of the skies. So the RAF are protecting the Channel, which in turn protects the RAF are protecting the Navy, which in turn protects the Channel. So the Luftwaffe have got to destroy the RAF in order to destroy the Navy in order to get across the Channel. Question 7, why did the government not allow at first people to shelter in the London Underground? Well, because essentially we didn't know what kind of weapons the Germans were going to be using. They might be using poisonous gas. And as poisonous gas is heavier than air, that would sink down into the tunnel network and it would kill people. Question 8, it said that the British government cracked the German code and knew about the raid on Coventry, but did not take any special steps to prevent it. If this was true, why did the government not do anything? This is a tricky one to summarize, but basically, if you know someone's code and then you start acting in a way which shows them that you know it, they'll just change the code. So the British government essentially weighed up what to do. If they moved everyone out of Coventry or put a load of fighter aircraft in the vicinity of Coventry, the Germans would know that the code had been cracked. And they would change the code, and Britain would lose access to all the other information that they were getting from the Nazis. So they basically weighed it up and they said, you know what, we're just going to have to let Coventry be destroyed, and the price is Coventry, but the product that we're getting is access to all of the Nazi war plans. Question 8, what's the nature of the relationship between the US and the UK, and how did the US help the UK prior to joining the war? Generally, it was very positive, although the US was officially neutral, but they sold the UK what was needed to keep war going, including giving them 50 destroyers in return for some naval bases in the Caribbean. And the US president, who is Franklin Delano Roosevelt, also signed something called the Lease-Lend Act, which granted a huge amount of weapons and resources to Britain. The first nation to actually ally with Britain militarily was the Soviet Union, and the battle in Africa that's widely considered to be the turning point of the war is the Battle of El Alamein. Okay, take as long as you need to mark those. You can, of course, go back and replay the answers. Now, new topic. You're going to try to guess what it is through pictures. So, here's the first picture. The fact it's come from the Dockland Museum or the Dock Museum Teaching Collection means nothing. That's just irrelevant. This is your clue to what we're talking about today. Pause for as long as it takes to make a guess. Here's the second clue as to what we're talking about today. This is precisely what it looks like. It is a woman painting a cow. Okay. Have a think and a pause. Here's your third one. Dr. Carrot, the children's deeply sinister best friend. For bonus points, you can tell me why Dr. Carrot is carrying a hat, even though his arms are too short to put the hat on his head. The answer is his head and the hat are both magnetic, pretty obviously. Okay. Yeah, so this is another clue about what we're talking about. Pause for as long as it takes. Should be pretty obvious now. This is another clue as to what we're talking about. You've probably guessed it, but just in case, we have one more. Pause for as long as needed, and there we go. And finally, both these two last clues have actually featured the word. And the word is, well, grease is the word, but the other word is blackout. Oh dear, look at that. That's not good, is it? Oh, found a problem with loom. Blackout. There you go. Oh, goodness me. Fun. Draw a cat. It's harder than it looks, this. It's become like Dr. Carrot, look. It's got a weird curly thing. Actually, give him a top hat. Okay, I don't really know what went on there. Good. Okay, yeah, it's blackout. The word is blackout. So we are looking today at air raids and air raid shelters. Okay, there's one. Air raid shelters. Before we do, go back. This is for going onto a car headlight. So you put it on the car headlight this way, and this bit up here stops the light shining up. And this obviously blocks quite a lot of the light, but you can still see enough to drive your car reasonably safely. Not safely enough that you can guarantee not hitting anything, which is why things that were dark need to be painted in stripy colours to be spotted. So in case the cow wandered out into the middle of the road and not so much killed the cow as killed a person, it had to be painted stripy. Dr. Carrot, well, carrots theoretically help you see in the dark, although that's apparently nonsense and was made up in order to make the Germans think that that's how we were knowing where their planes were, whereas in fact we knew where their planes were because of radar, which were developed. In fact, look, you can see here the little, that's the thing that goes on the front of the car. Yeah, well, I don't want to talk about the cat again. Right, okay, air raid shelters. Now, I'm going to just give you some information here. You'll use all of this later, but you don't need to write any of it down. Just understand. 4 main types of shelter during World War II. There's one called the Anderson shelter, which is named after its inventor, Mr. Shelter. Very good. There's one called the Morrison shelter, also invented by Mr. Shelter. Just in case you think I'm being serious, no, I'm not. Mr. Anderson and Morrison invented the shelters. There was no Mr. Tube Station. People just used tube stations. And there was also no Mr. Street Communal. But people did use street communal shelters. Okay, so 4 types of shelter: Anderson, Morrison, tube stations, and street communal shelters. Let's look at each one in turn. The most common one was the Anderson shelter. If you've ever seen footage of people going into an air raid shelter and they've gone down the steps into a sort of corrugated iron thing, which looks like a shed, which is half underground, they're going into an Anderson shelter, most common type of shelter. And they wouldn't just be built in your garden, they'd also be built in parks or other public areas, and they looked like that. There's all sorts going on here, including, I'm not sure, this appears to be a toy dog on wheels with a gas mask on. Just raises too many questions for me, basically. But the idea is pretty straightforward. You dig a hole in the garden, quite a big one. You put your Anderson shelter in there, and then the soil, which you dug to make the hole, you put that back over the shelter, and that sort of gives it some level of protection. And a bit like fire emergency procedures now mean you've got to retreat a certain amount of feet from the building. You'd do that as well. And you would go and you'd sleep in the shelter at night if an air raid sounded. So it would be kitted out with beds and equipment and whatever. Then you had the Morrison shelter, which was great because although these were good fun / useful, there was a certain group of people who couldn't use them. Pause a few moments and think, who's not going to benefit from this kind of shelter? Okay, hopefully you worked out that, well, there's quite a few groups who might not benefit, but one group who might not benefit are groups who don't have gardens. Maybe you live in a flat or something like that. In which case, the Morrison shelter might be for you. The Morrison shelter is a massive cage, basically, and it fits under a table. That's the most practical place, or at some other part of the house. The table's best because then under the table, you've got extra protection from the table. You build it on the main floor. Don't build it like up in the attic because that would be stupid. Look, there's enough room to lie down, and it protects you from falling rubble. Now, there are certain problems with the Morrison shelter. Pause for a moment and tell me, you can look at that picture and work it out. What are the key problems with the Morrison shelter? Okay. One problem you might have got is that it does not protect you from various other problems. It does protect you from rubble, but if they hit a water main and it starts flooding, you've got a problem. If there's an incendiary bomb and the things around you catch fire, you've got a problem. If they were to have used poison gas and you're in a Morrison shelter, you've got a problem. But it's obviously better than doing nothing at all. And I think they were designed so that the doors came inwards rather than went outwards. So at least you'd be able to sort of inch your way through the rubble. If the house fell on you, it would keep you alive if the rescue services could get to you in time. Okay. Then you've got tube stations. Now, at first, as you'll remember from the video, the government did not want people in tube stations. And there are two reasons for this. One of them you already know, one of them is new. Can you think of what the reasons are why the government might not want individuals to be in the tube stations during air raids? If you need to go back and have a look at your notes about Britain alone, you can do this. On the other hand, you might just be able to work it out. So pause for 2 minutes maybe. Have a think. Why does the government not want people going into tube stations? One reason, some of them aren't very deep. Okay, the deepest tube stations, ones like, what is the deepest one? I used to know this. It's something ridiculously deep, like Elephant and Castle, so I don't know. But Bank, I don't know. Anyway, that's something for you to look up. They weren't deep enough, these other ones. You could get very little shelter. And secondly, of course, poisonous gas. If you didn't bring your gas mask and you went into a tube station and they dropped poisonous gas, you had a real problem. However, as you will remember from the video, the London public sheltered in tube stations anyway. So the government adopted the mentality of, well, look, if we're going to tell them no and they do it anyway, we might as well tell them yes. So the government said, okay, fine, you can. So you got people sheltering in tube stations during the Blitz, and a collection of motley people, so little babies, grown up adults, all sorts of people. Every year I put this joke up on the picture, and every year fewer and fewer people find it funny. If you can tell me why this is funny, I'm impressed. So one of them says, down in a tube station at midnight, and the other one says, ooh. You can ask your parents. Okay. The fourth one is street communal shelters. They're made of brick, about 8 inches thick, big bricks, and ceiling of reinforced concrete, 6 inches thick, very big. And this is for people who had no back gardens and lived up in a flat. Or alternatively, don't forget, the Germans didn't wait for everyone to be in bed before starting bombing. The German bombs could arrive at any time. If you basically had no other shelter options available, so you're walking home from work, or you're walking to work, or you're at work, you would need to take cover in a street communal shelter. This is one being built. Now, as you can see, they're pretty robust, they're pretty solid, but they're not very nice. For practical reasons, they got no windows, because you don't want windows. Pause for a moment and think, why do you not want windows? I'm sure you worked it out. You have windows, it's glass and flying glass. That's no good. It weakens the structure, etc., etc., etc. Without doubt, this kind of shelter was, the fourth best out of Anderson, Morrison, Tube, and Communal. Communal was bottom of the list, but it's better than nothing. So people did use these, and they were glad of them, but they were not the most well-loved ones. And actually, as the war went on, people started using them as public toilets, so they began to smell pretty stinky as well. Anyway, those were the types of shelters. Did the shelters work? Well, they were better than nothing, and they were probably better than either of the other two alternatives. And people did both of these. So my first question is, let's say that you decide you're not going to use an air raid shelter. What building would you go to because it won't get hit by a bomb? Pause and think. Okay, well, the answer was the church, of course. God will protect you. Yeah, okay, I'm not going to say any more on that because religion's a thorny subject, but let's just say certain churches were bombed and destroyed. St. Paul's bomb dropped, but it didn't explode, so maybe. Anyway, or you might take a bit of a more fatalistic approach, and you might just say, well, if you're going to die, you might as well die in your own bed rather than out in the shelter. So, yeah, there you go. No shelter of any type could withstand a direct hit from a bomb. The street communal shelter, if a bomb fell on it, everyone's dead. Same with your Anderson shelter, same with your Morrison shelter. And on one tragic occasion, and it was at the Angel, I think, up in North London tube station, a bomb fell outside the station and it bounced right the way down the stairwell into the middle of where people were sheltering, and it exploded and it killed over 120 people. One bomb. Okay, bit of a freak, series of physics to make it bounce down there, but that bomb killed more people than any other single bomb dropped on London, as far as I'm aware. And it's fair to say that, given how many bombs there were, it was a risk. To give you an idea of how many bombs there were, this is a map of London. This is central London here. So you've got Hyde Park up in the top left. This is obviously the Thames. There's Westminster and the Houses of Parliament. So this is the area that the German bombing raids really wanted to take out, because if you can destroy Parliament and maybe kill Churchill, then that's kind of handy. So now I'm going to put up the same area under a second map, and each red dot represents where a bomb fell. Okay, so yeah, they even bombed the river, which seems frankly unnecessary, but yeah, there you go. There's a lot of bombs. Some of them are incendiary bombs, some of them are fire bombs, some of them are just explosives. There's also there is a map for checking this, so you can go online and find out where the nearest bomb fell to you if you wanted. Okay, right. That's been quite a lengthy introduction. I wouldn't usually do it that way, obviously. If you really want, you can do what we would have done in class, which is make a blue tack man and then drop a big book on it to simulate what would happen when a bomb fell. It's kind of morbid, actually, now I talk about it like that. Right, let's move on. Got some questions for you. These first three questions, you do not write it down. You simply think, okay? Recall the information. Question 1, there were 4 types of shelter. What were they? And what kind of people was each one intended for? Take as long as you need, then unpause. Question 2. If you didn't want to go to a shelter, what were the 2 alternatives that some people used? And question 3. Now, this is kind of implicit from what we looked at way, way, way back, and I will give you the answer to this one in a moment. What was the blackout, and why was it in place? Okay, the answer to that was the blackout was when the government made you stop using light. And the reason it was in place was because if you're in an airplane and you're flying over a city, it will be lit up. If it's not lit up, you can't be certain where you are dropping your bombs. You might be dropping your bombs in farmland. So the blackout was a period of time where you had to go all the way back. You had to expect no street lighting to be on. Your eyes will get used to the darkness. Take it easy. You had to equip your car completely differently. You couldn't have an inside light in your car. You had to have dimmed lamps, slip mask on the headlights, and so on. You had to paint bits of your car white so you could see it from the ground, but you had to otherwise have no light on your car. You had to eat lots of carrots, which, as we've established, was a bit of a publicity trick. He also seems to be wearing heels, it's still got very confusing now. They had to paint cows, and they had to dim the lights. Okay, so other things that ARP wardens would do, ARP wardens were the air raid precautions wardens who would go around and ensure that the blackout was happening, is they would check that you'd got blackout curtains up, which are special curtains that would leave very little light coming through. They would patrol the streets above on an air raid, during an air raid, and get you off the streets. It's a dangerous job. Okay, here are your tasks then. Okay, firstly, in your books, I would like you to write an answer to this question. I've just spoken about like one or two pieces of this, but ARP wardens patrolled during air raids to ensure that blackout was kept adhered to. What skills or attributes would an ARP warden need and why? So I'd like you to write that in your books. Try to find 3 or 4 skills which they would need and explain why they would need these skills. That should take no more than maybe 5 minutes to research ARP wardens and 5 minutes to write it. Then the rest of the lesson, which should be the majority of time, will be spent on this task. In your books, you are to either design a job advert for an ARP warden or design a government information sheet about different types of air raid shelters. Now, it's for the individual student to decide which one of these they're going to do. If you want to do a bit of extension work, and really sort of stretch yourself, it would be this one, the ARP warden job advert, because that would require you to find out quite a lot more about the role of ARP wardens, about the blackout, about the hours, and so on. So if you're thinking of history next year at GCSE, this might be one of those things which you could do, because it would be a good opportunity to enhance your understanding. Alternatively, I don't know how much work other subjects have pressed for you, or what what pressures you've got on. This is probably a safer one, a government information sheet about different types of air raid shelters. We've mentioned all 4 of them. Either of these tasks, I don't mind, but both of them should take up one side of A4. You're only doing one, but it's not like this one's going to be shorter than this one. Both of them should fit on one side of A4, and they should use the information you have covered today. Okay, hopefully that's clear. At some point, Teams will be up and running, and we'll maybe try and check in at some point. But for now, let's take it like that. You do not email me the work. It will be reviewed in a different way. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.